first of all, thank you very much, everyone, for joining. I've spoken to a huge amount of people over the last few weeks, and although a lot of heartwarming stories, there's a lot of heart-wrenching stories. And the appreciation is there for taking the time to join us. Just a bit of background on this series. It's the first episode in a collaboration between the Future of Work community and the HR Tech Partnership. The Future of Work community is becoming and a growing collection of talent, tech, and VC leaders to provide a bit more diversity of perspective within this space. And I think that's something that some of the communities were lacking slightly. So that's just to give you a bit of context. The diversity of perspective we want to try and mirror in every panel that we have in each of these episodes. And I think that you'll agree we've managed to achieve that on this first one, which is great. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce our panelists, and I'll let them do that, and perhaps they can expand a little bit with an icebreaker on what they're doing outside of work at the moment. So Devyani, do you want to kick us off?
Sure, Will. Thank you. So I'm Devyani Vaishampayan. I'm the managing partner of the HR Tech Partnership. And my background has been really as a chief human resource officer. I've worked for fairly varied businesses, but they all have been large, complex, international. So Citibank, AT&T, Rolls-Royce, and British Gas are examples of businesses I've worked for. The HR Tech Partnership was set up about 2.5 years ago, and we do two things. We manage an angel investment fund, which invests in AI-based HR tech startups, and the investors are all senior HR directors. So it's very much about domain experts investing in a space they understand. And we also run a human capital digital innovation hub, which is a 6-month program to help corporates experiment and engage with AI-based HR startups.
Great. And you didn't manage to mention Bridge.
Oh, I was following instruction, but now that you're making me talk about, So I guess one of the things about the lockdown, the great thing is it's giving me time to learn an area, which is really Bridge. And I know I'm getting old, so probably preparing me for old age at some point, but I'm really, really enjoying it. Yeah.
Great. Thanks. Right, Tim, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Tim Baker. I'm a partner at executive search firm called Wilton & Bain. We are a global firm that work with organizations in technology, financial services, consumer businesses to find executive talent. I lead the people and culture practice. So I speak and work with CHROs and heads of talent acquisition to build their teams. I'd love to say I'm learning a language or a guitar. Yesterday, I tried to stop my daughter pouring glitter all over the sofas. So primarily trying to balance my working life with my 4.5-year-old daughter.
Amazing. Thanks. I think a lot of people can reflect on that. Okay. And Andreas?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Will. And thanks, everyone, for joining. And I hope you're all staying safe currently, wherever you are. So I'm Andres. I currently lead the people reporting and analytics function at Upfield. You may be familiar with Upfield from some of our products in the supermarkets, the most famous being Flora. So we're the largest plant-based company in the world, formerly part of Unilever. And my background is in people analytics. So I've been in people analytics for a few years now, worked for Facebook previously, and then before that for Bank of America, where I led the kind of talent management, talent analytics space. So really excited to be here. Fact about me, I haven't been able to focus on much because we're expecting our first child in just under 2 weeks. So if I have to rush out of the room now, is because my wife's gone into labor. So you will excuse me. It's been very interesting times. Thanks.
I think that's probably extenuating circumstances. So I'm happy with that. And then finally, Tush, and just quickly, I want to thank you personally and from all of us here for stepping in as at such late notice. A lot of you will have noticed that Karen isn't on the panel, but and this was a suggestion from a colleague of mine. I'm going to try and interview her and try and get her insights into this. And I think she might be listening anyway. So get well soon, Karen. Tush.
Right. Hi, I'm Tush Vijayaratne. So I'm currently working for Publicis Sapient, which is a digital business transformation organization. My role right now is I'm a product owner for the internal transformation team for talent acquisition. Background-wise, got 15 years experience in talent acquisition, starting from agencies to RPO to internal organizations. Previous internal companies, highlighting them are Revilient and ASOS. Interesting fact about me, I'm currently doing three main things. One is trying to keep a 9-year-old busy during this time, which is very interesting. Secondly, drinking a lot of single malt whiskey, which is probably not a good thing to do. And I've also decided to get a puppy end of the month. So I'm reading a lot of books on how to make a house puppy-proof, which is worse than making it baby-proof by the looks of it.
Amazing. Yeah, I saw a video that you posted on LinkedIn this morning. If anyone wants to connect with Tush, you should, because a very heartwarming video from his son about how nature is recovering. So, Tush, I'm going to stick with you for the first question. Just as a reminder for everyone, please feel free to use the chat function and the Q&A function, as we'll be running through some of your questions at the end after the Q&A discussion. So, firstly, Tush, I want to come to you on more of a general warm-up question, and it's hard not to ignore what's going on at the moment. So, what have you seen business and HR leaders doing, and what have they been focused on for you, and what's sort of stood out?
I think the key thing is our organizations, similar to us, the key priority has been the safety of our own people. So making sure that the mental health side of things, people are in a good position to working from home, good business continuity is still there. And secondly, how we can service our clients at the same time. So being a consultant is really important for us and similar to other organizations. So rapid measure, agility in terms of the way we do things, business continuity, no knee-jerk reactions. And I've seen that done really well in terms of good planning, not making rapid decisions for the sake of making it. We've also taken a stance of internal mobility versus hiring. So who do we have right now who we can move around? It might not be the ideal role for them, might not be the 100% fit, but we can help in training them up and upskilling them. So that's been a key focus, I think, for us as an organization, Publicis Sapient, but also seen for the companies that I'm speaking to, in addition to preparing for what the future looks like going forward.
Sure. Okay. And Andreas, what have you been seeing?
Yeah, absolutely. I think echoing obviously everything that Tush said, I think the other thing we've seen and we've done is, and probably that's going to disappoint a lot of people on this panel, is going back to basics. We have had to go back to basics because everything happens so fast, and obviously very, very few companies were prepared for the scale of the change. So, couple of the things obviously that we've had to do very quickly, particularly on the TA side, very quickly create some sort of virtual onboarding for both our new joiners and everybody else who's been in the business for very little time before this hit. I myself had a starter on the very first day that we went into lockdown. So we very quickly created virtual onboarding on basic tools that we had available to us, such as Microsoft Teams. We very quickly got out virtual interviewing guides for both our recruiters and our hiring managers. We had to train people up on Teams, Zoom, and then kind of echoing what Tusha said as well. We also looking at if some recruiters are now having a quiet downtime, how can we redeploy them to looking at a wider picture? So the talent pipelines that are out there, we know, unfortunately, that there is going to be quite a big talent pool out there, and already is, and is growing by the day, which is an unfortunate situation. But all the businesses need to be ready for that. So I know our head of talent acquisition has looked at redeploying their recruiters and making sure they're looking externally as well as internally as well. So, quick and basic measures, and obviously transparency, communication, and real-time data above everything to keep everyone safe.
Yeah, completely agree. And Tim, you've got a really interesting insight into HR, people, talent leaders. What have you been seeing?
Yeah, there's a spectrum that ranges from organizations that are still reacting and responding through to those that are looking ahead and through this. So, I had a chat with a guy at Cisco last week, and they're responding to it in a really interesting way. So they had their react phase, then they've had a reflect phase, and then it's about reimagine and rebound. And I think it's an interesting way of looking at things. And I've thought about organizations that I'm talking to and where they are on those 4 stages. And I would say half are still reacting. And as Andreas said, there's some very practical basics around virtual onboarding, getting kit to new starters, operating around Microsoft Teams and Zoom. So, and some companies have still got their head sort of stuck in that. However, I'm speaking to organizations, particularly in the last week or so, where they're starting to look through this and they're planning for both the phase back into some sense of normality, but also how the world is going to look differently on the other side. And again, there are some practical steps. If we're going to keep social distancing till the end of the year, a technology company that I spoke to on Tuesday, as all of us, our desks are under a metre apart. So are they going to bring people back? A third of the workforce come in each day. What about transportation? There's some very practical steps. I think the reimagining piece is the most interesting, and that's where the transformational brand of people leader that I know are really getting their energy from. What is the world going to look like? Is this going to fundamentally change the way that we're operating? From a talent acquisition perspective, even organizations that are in good shape financially are starting to put the brakes on some of the hiring. And, it is an obvious message that they want to look after the people currently in their businesses before bringing on the new. We've heard stories ranging from offers rescinding through to offers honoured. I've put on my LinkedIn an interview I did with Dan Cole at Colt. They've honoured and are continuing to hire everybody. And therefore, they're making sure that they manage the communication effectively when people join. So, virtual onboarding is something that we're exploring as a business, and, helping clients to think through that. So, yeah, a range from the reactionary through to the reimagining.
And finally, Devyani.
Yeah, so again, I think through the hub, we talk to a lot of HR leaders and business leaders. And I would say, first and foremost, the furlough was something that kept everyone occupied, figuring out what to do, etc. But I think that the dust there is settling quite a bit. Currently, I see 2 aspects from an employee perspective. The first is clearly remote working still continues to occupy a lot of time. And the initial phase was first, even some of the basics, because there are a lot of businesses. I think all of us are used to working remotely somewhat, but even large businesses, at least half their workforce has been very office-based. They don't even own a laptop. So again, it was the basics of scrambling to get laptops, hand-holding people who've never ever worked from home before. And now I see the focus shifting a little more to, okay, that's done. Can we focus on productivity around remote working, whether that is supporting employees in a different way around wellness, or trying to understand after the initial scramble of initially no meetings, then the next couple of weeks, too many meetings because everyone was trying to kind of get on virtual calls, to a little more of a stabilization. So that's on remote working. But the other factor, I think clearly, that's been mentioned is the contraction of the workforce. I think that is a very real issue that is concerning everyone. I was looking at the results of a poll that the Office of National Statistics has come out with, and they polled 5,316 businesses. And the expectation on an average is 40% of the workforce probably is going to contract, which is quite a big number. And obviously it depends on which industry, travel, aviation, retail, hospitality have been impacted far more, but even the others. And yet on the other side, I think an interesting piece of information, the the Swedish Medical Association has just come up that quite a few of their health workers have actually doubled the salary they've increased during this period. And that's because they've agreed to location changes, putting in extra hours. So it's a very, I think, unsettling and uncertain environment, but which requires a far greater focus on workforce planning.
Sure. Okay. And just moving on to question 2 now, just in the interest of time. This is now just going to look at talent acquisition in a bit more detail. And I thought I'd kick off, Andreas, with you, because I know you have some thoughts around the assessment, selection, and onboarding processes.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Will. So I think some of the other panelists on this call obviously have a little bit more insight into kind of the overall technology space. So what I wanted to share, and I'm sure they're all sharing that, what I wanted to share is kind of my thoughts where I saw the assessment and selection space moving, and what businesses should really be thinking about when they are choosing an assessment and selection tool, because there's just so many out there at the moment, right? And what I've been focusing for the last few years, kind of my career, is that intersection of the individual and the teams, right? So where I'm going with this is we have had a lot of focus in the assessment and selection space in terms of evaluating and assessing the individual, right? So individual skills, individual personality traits, individual background, and all that kind of thing, which kind of refer to as the human capital, right? And there's a lot of tools out there that do that sort of thing, and I'm sure a lot of my co-panelists will talk about some of these. However, where I do see the field moving, and where I think a lot of the companies should also be looking into this, is looking at the social capital aspects of assessment and selection, i.e. the teams via the individual. And I think this crisis has probably brought that a little bit more into focus as well, because I think the skills that work in a normal office where you work together side by side are much more amplified when you're working so remotely and not having human contact directly. So there's been a lot of intersection and some really interesting companies in terms of linking organizational network analysis with assessment and selection, i.e., how will an individual perform in the team that you're bringing them into, right? So we've seen a lot of that in the research, and both in also in the practical organizational space as well. I've seen it myself. I've seen hundreds of thousands of pounds spent on recruitment of individuals who may be rock stars in a different environment. And then they come in and they simply do not perform in your own environment, right? Because the culture may be different, their networks may be different, the social interactions are completely different. So where I see this space is there's going to be a lot of focus on trying to understand whether the individual that comes in fits into your team culture. And there's a few companies that are already started looking into this. We've got Humanize, TrustSphere, Sabre, that all kind of analyze your own personal culture and look at creating tests for those individuals that you're hiring. I think that's highly important. We spend a long time focusing on individuals and how they perform on cognitive tests, how they perform on personality tests, integrity tests, and we know that's important. We've all read the studies. We've all read Hunter and Schmidt meta-analysis. We know what works. We know cognitive works or GMA. We know structured interview work. What we don't know, I think, in my view, is that intersection where will the individual that comes in, will they actually work in your space? And, I've gone for different industries and I've had to use a very different set of skills in each one. And I have failed in my career multiple times because the environment wasn't right for me or the culture wasn't right for me. So I think that is, if I was to give a hint, one of my views where the industry is heading would definitely be across that. And that's also important for onboarding as well, right? Microsoft had done a huge study about O&A and onboarding, and they looked at, one of the most important things for retention in the first 6 months is whether a manager actually has one-to-ones with their employee, right? And builds that network, and where their manager then pushes that employee across to build their network. If that doesn't happen, then the employee most of the times fails. A very basic thing, right? A very important though in the assessment space.
Okay.
So I'll leave it there. I'll leave it to my co-panelists to talk about the specific skills, but that's kind of.
Thank you, Andreas. And perhaps Devyani, if you want to try and talk a bit more about some of the solutions that are coming in at the moment in this space.
Yeah, so I think firstly, technology has always been used in talent acquisition, but I guess it was more automation. And I think the difference that machine learning brings in is it makes the whole process far more intelligent because there is learning that's happening. There's the predictive bit it can help you with, but I'm sure a lot of you know that. Coming to the specifics, I think around the assessment and the interview kind of area, gamification has been getting a lot of traction recently. Now, and I think given remote working, remote hiring, gamification actually is going to become far more important. Particularly around assessing, as Andreas was saying, the social, cognitive, behavioral areas, but also going to be important from the perspective of making sure candidates stay engaged, because it's going to be very difficult to lose. It's going to be very easy to lose good candidates if the process is not engaging enough. So definitely seeing quite a few solutions in the gamification space. The second area that I'm seeing technology being used quite a bit around virtual assessment is not surprisingly enough around technical skills, and whether it is online hackathons, whether it's online, kind of tool testing. But I think something that's going to be useful to anyone who's not in the technology industry is all of us will need digital skills far more in the future. And yet I think most recruiters have a very limited understanding of who's good, who's not so good. For example, I've seen a great solution that tests coding skills, but it does it via a community. So as a recruiter, you are relying on the assessment of a large group of experts done in a safe, protected way. And I think those solutions are definitely going to get more momentum. The third area, which has also been around for some time, is really virtual interviews. And again, given how familiar Zoom people are getting with Zoom and getting comfortable with it, I think that will gain traction. But of course, the important thing is it's not just an interview. I mean, currently what you have is the ability to pre-record, to get some analytics. But I think you will see an increasing level of sophistication around virtual interviewing that will go up over the next couple of years. Two more technologies that have started, but it's probably still early days and also a bit expensive. The first is virtual reality. And I know the common use of technology still is around whether it's volume movement or it's skills. Virtual assessment is going to even at senior levels, mid to senior levels. And what virtual reality does is it helps you recreate a scenario, see how the person does within that scenario, and therefore helps you get far more inputs around what used to be subjective areas. So I think virtual reality, you will see more of that over the next few years. And finally, I think facial recognition. Clearly in Europe, I think I don't see that happening for quite some time, given the tough rules that we have. But if you look at Asia, particularly China, facial recognition is increasingly being used even in the interview assessment process. It can be a bit scary because a 15-minute interview actually can provide you with around 150 data points, right down to your emotion, what you're thinking, what you're feeling. But just in terms of, I think, what's coming up as far as technology goes, it will be, again, something that could get used far more over the next few years.
Perfect, thank you. And Tim, I'm going to come to you for the next question. But just Tush, do you have anything to add on what you're currently seeing at the moment in terms of the technology and the solutions that you're seeing?
Yeah, I think Devyani touched on a very key topic, and that's the difference between AI and automation. So obviously AI is the science around it, it's the cognitive thought process and the reasoning, whereas the automation side is more the robotic function around it. Now, for me, success of an AI principle. It requires AI, automation, and also the agile ways of thinking. Those three are fundamental for me for success. For AI product, I look at three things mainly in terms of whether it's future-proof and should be used really. One is personalization, and that's more about the candidate experience side of things. One is the search options around it. Is it the right job, the right candidate? And the third one is the insights. Those three criteria have to be there for me to consider an AI tool. From a talent acquisition perspective, AI can be roughly broken down into about 9 different buckets. One is AI-driven assessments, and that is what Devan mentioned, more about gamification and video-based assessments, making sure it's the right thing to run a person through the process. The candidate rediscovery, and this is looking at your existing databases, your existing ATS systems. How does the AI pull out those people at the right time, depending on the rules that are live at that particular instance? The job descriptions, AI optimization around it. And that is more about, is it the right grammar? Is it the right phrases, the right wording to be pushed out? This is where should we actually be putting these adverts? Where is it? The personalization level being on all the chatboxing has been around for a long, long time, and we've seen different versions of chatboxing. And this can be used for the convenience process of finding a job, applying for a job, general FAQs of the organization. It's becoming more and more popular. I've seen it go really right and really wrong at the same time. And resume filtering, again, is really, it's used a lot in AI, but that depends on how strong that initial data is. I think the key thing with data and AI is there's a direct correlation between the two. What goes in comes out the best if the data is really good and optimized at the best perspective. So I think it's important to know that whatever data you're using to an AI engine is clean as possible to get the maximum out of it. So those are my initial thoughts on AI and how it should be used. I think organizations need to do the right AI tool for them. There's so many tools out there, so many different options of using it. But why are you using it? What are you trying to get out of it? That justification has to be very relevant to what you want to do going forward, and hence choosing where you should be focusing your AI, because you can focus in everywhere possible, but it's expensive, it takes time, a lot of resources, a lot of internal training. So it's important for companies to understand exactly where they want to focus, even from a TA perspective, because it can be broken down in so many different areas.
Okay, sure. And I think the interesting point about the information that you put in initially is quite an interesting one. And that's all, a lot of the time it's a barrier to adoption. And Tim, just moving on to that kind of thing, and you have a great insight into leadership teams globally. What would you say about building a business case for this and some of the things that Tush touched on?
Yeah, I mean, when you're in to countries that you didn't have access to before. And example that I give, we're doing some work with King, technology company that make Candy Crush. They are always in the market for technology talent. It's hard to find. And at the moment, they need them to be in Barcelona, they need to be in Berlin, they need to be in Stockholm. But what they've found now is that they can interview people in different territories and are talking to legal about setting up legal entities in different places. And why do you need to have people in the office? So I think the business case is the ability to attract and hire talent in countries where you don't exist physically, and the ability to work as virtual teams that we're all proving now is perfectly reasonable and can happen. So the fundamentals of the business case for the TA community is we now have access to talent that we didn't before for geographical restraints. And I think that's going to be one that organizations will continue to take throughout the other side of this.
Brilliant, thank you. So I'm just slightly conscious of time. It took us a while to get into the brunt of it. So I'm going to end actually on some advice from all of you, I think, and then we'll open it up to the floor. We've had a couple of questions come through. So Devyani, first of all, for any talent leaders or HR leaders looking at this as an option, what would you advise?
So I think two pieces of advice. One is clearly, while there's going to be a slowing down of external hiring, I think Tush mentioned there's going to be an increased emphasis on internal skills matching. And I think, for example, one of our investing companies, Recruitment Smart, is great at doing that. So I think using AI-based solutions still makes sense, given the need to now match internal skills and understand the fit is going to be even more important. That's number one. And the second piece of advice to anyone, it's not just talent acquisition, anyone in HR, anyone in business, is digital is going to become far more important. So start upskilling yourself in terms of digital skills. And the hub that we run is really, again, referring to some of the adoption challenges that were mentioned earlier, in terms of there's so much out there, you don't know what's a good fit. You need to understand what problem are you trying to assess. You need to make sure that you're handheld, you're not investing too much. The hub is a great way to try it out, because it provides you with an opportunity not to get committed to a solution, but to try it for a short period of time.
Okay, sure, thank you. And I'm just going to actually quickly come to one of the questions that's in the chat box. And Devyani, I might just come back to you as you get a lot of exposure to a lot of the products and solutions. Have you seen any blockchain technology used in here?
Yeah, so I think as far as talent acquisition goes, we've seen blockchain being two great solutions actually. One for employee referencing. So once you get your references, you don't have to keep on repeating it when you go to a new client, and that's very useful. I've also seen blockchain being used in learning around pay and benefits, particularly for contract temporary workers.
Perfect. Okay, thank you. And I think one of the questions earlier, I'm going to try and round this into the advice that you guys can give as well. And perhaps Andreas, actually no, Tush, can you maybe shed some light on your thoughts about whether things will go back to the way they were, or do you think virtual is the new black?
So for me, I think the potential of AI and any other disruptive technology out there, it's so profound that it can also lead to a bit of paralysis. So you need to have a good strategy for constant adaptation of what you decide to choose. For me, there's three main ways of looking into it. And one is basically looking at the focus on the issues of the long term. So what is the long-term agenda behind this? Why are you trying to put this technology in place? Why are you trying to bring something new? Why the change? Spend time looking at what that technology is, but there's so many different technologies that can do one particular thing. So what is the right solution for you as a company, for you as a team, and you as a business? And also the impact that has on your business and industry, because what will happen is whatever change you do, whether it's a technology change or people change or process change, it will impact your direct TA team. The TA team mindset has to change from a very transactional to a very strategic perspective. And that does mean training up the individuals. It doesn't mean getting rid of people. It doesn't mean getting rid of jobs. It's just basically making sure that people move away from the more mundane tasks to doing more strategic stuff. And how do you change the mindset of individuals and also give them the opportunity and the tools to do that at the same time? So I think that's the direction where we're heading. We've got a bit of time now to think of exactly what is it we want to achieve going forward, because it will never be what it used to be. The norm will be potentially who needs to come into office on a daily basis to do their work, who can actually stay at home right throughout, who wants to do a 50-50 or 30-70 kind of split. That is not just from TA function, but for everybody out there. That means the interviewing, the entire process of a TA function, the entire journey side of things. So I think virtual interviews are a thing of the future. It's going to happen now. We started doing it in certain aspects now, like Public Sapient went to virtual interviews within 48 hours from lockdown, which was amazing. We did 48 interviews in 48 hours, which is phenomenal for us. Things like that will happen, but that requires a mindset change of adaptation, agility. So that's kind of where I think the industry is going to go. But my thinking is, do think about what you want to do going forward. Don't rush into anything. Plan it properly. do what is right for you as a company, your team, and your business.
Perfect. And Andreas, in terms of advice from you, and I'll try and work in one last question as well after that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll keep it brief. And just following from Devyani's points, I think two pieces of advice from me. One, if you're still not doing agile at the moment as a company, start. I think that's the key thing. If you're still doing waterfall, if you're thinking about a piece of kit or a system, and you're thinking about a 6, 12, 18-month plan to implement it and sit down and think about getting it live in 2021, 2022, don't. I think we are way past waterfall deliveries where, by the time you install that piece of kit, you will have another 100 come out in the market. So test things, be agile, be quick. Just like Devyani was saying, use partners like ourselves in order to test things quick, and if they don't work, move on, right? The key principle of agile. And the second piece of advice for me, I guess following on from that as well, is what are you looking at? So from my personal experience, what am I looking for when I'm evaluating systems? And for me, there's only two key things, criteria at the very top, and then obviously a number of others at the bottom, further on. One is user experience. I think that should be above everything. And again, that's a very agile principle. You have to look at a piece of kit or a system from the point of view of the customer, whoever your customer may be. If it's a recruiter, if it's a hiring manager, if it's a candidate, you've got to think like them, right? So always look at the piece of kit and functionality. And my usual experience is that the bigger the piece of kit and the more it tries to do, the less user-friendly it is. So don't be afraid to have multiple things running at the same time. And then secondly, being an analytics guy, you'd expect this, is it has to be metrics focused, right? So we have to be able to understand whether the tool is working on quantifiable metrics. If you cannot quantify what the tool's giving you, then you shouldn't be looking at it, right? So those are kind of my 2 bits of advice.
Sorry, yeah, I think we've probably got time for one more question. And it's around, so if the workforce overall, from Charmaine, if the workforce overall will contract and internal mobility will be the preferred option for covering job role requirements, what advice would you have for all those who currently haven't got a job or a role at the moment? Possibly Tim, if you had any thoughts on that?
Yeah, look, I think the advice for job seekers over the last few years has been the same, whether the market's buoyant or not. I think the world has changed from finding a job to being found. And I think you've got to understand the way that in-house talent acquisition teams work as well as search professionals. So you need to be present on LinkedIn. You need to have a profile that's out in the market, because you'll see that advertising is dropping off and people are actively looking to pursue and find you. So I think that's always critical. Make sure that you have that presence, make sure you're able to be found, and treat your LinkedIn profile as a CV, and be clever around the keywords that you include in that. Because if you think about Boolean searches that in-house recruitment teams do, you need to be found. I think the second is, of course, you can use firms like ours and you can use your recruitment partners, but using your own network is critical as well. Again, often when we're running a search, we will speak to sources who will recommend individuals to us. And by ensuring that your network knows you're looking, going to those that have received the calls, you need to be recommended as well. So, of course, you can apply for roles, you can do the proactive stuff, but I think having the ability to be found is critical in this market as well as any.
Absolutely. And just finally, a really good point from Paul. Thank you very much for that. Just mentioned that this the business change and the success a lot of people are having remotely, that the climate emergency will outlast the pandemic that we're going through at the moment. I fully agree with that. And to end on a positive note, I think the talent cycle as business plays its role in tackling that will be improved moving forward as well. And I think we can probably all agree on that.